Welcome everyone to this month's Jyotish Journey webinar associated with the recent article that was sent out entitled Rising Political Star. Obviously, this was an article on two Democratic hopefuls, and also I made some comments regards to Donald Trump's chart, current President of the United States. And more ideally, that this webinar would then also be looking at additional charts of American politicians who are going to be involved in running for president in the upcoming U.S. presidential election. But I actually don't have any more reliable charts of that nature. So actually, I'm going to focus in on an aspect of the article that you saw having to do with please mute your mic, folks. If you've come on board, please mute your mic. We're hitting background noise. Very important, thank you. And so this session, as I was saying, is going to deal with what I outlined as being a research of K.N. Rao's, who worked on a tremendous number of charts of politicians. He was asked to work on them and predict on them during his civil service career. But then also just, I would describe K.N. Rao almost as being something of a political historian. And he's written extensively about this. And so the first thing I want to do is to pull up my article and sort of highlight again that section of it that we're going to be looking at in particular. So without further ado, I'm going to do that. So if people, someone could confirm that they're seeing the Word document in front of them, yes?
No. Oh, now, yes, now. Yes.
Okay. Okay, seeing it now. So this is the section of the article that I'm referring to that people will recall. And this is he's speaking, these are his words, I'm quoting him here. He's saying that if the Matrikaraka, the MK, and the Putrakaraka, PK, form a relationship in the birth chart through conjunction or aspect, and of course we're talking about Rashi Drishti here since we're doing Jaimini and using Jaimini Karakas, and then they also come under the influence of Mars or Rahu and Ketu. Such a person, if they become a ruler, now this could be a person any position of authority, but he's referring specifically here to people who become rulers of countries. If they become a ruler becomes very assertive or even a dictator is a question that needs to be observed on many horoscopes. The influence of Jupiter or any benefic tones down the aggressiveness of the malefic influence. To do this, Jupiter should not be the MK or the PK. In other words, it should be making aspect to one of those or both. And he talks about his line of reasoning this way. My line of reasoning has been Matrikarka represents the seat of power. So if you read K.N. Rao's case studies in regards to politicians, there's a real emphasis on the fourth house and the fourth lord, both from the Prashi point of view and also from the Jaimini point of view, from Karakamsha Lagna, and then also related to Dasha Lagna, when a person comes to power, because the fourth house rules, as he'd like to describe it, the Simhansa, or the seat of power. So if you've got a seat in Congress, if you've got a seat in the U.S. Senate, if you have a seat in some parliament in Britain or in or in India, this is related to the fourth house, fourth lord. And so that is represented in the Jaimini system by the MK, obviously, signifying all the indications related to the fourth house. And then when it's connected to the PK, Putrakaraka, which of course is related to all the significations of the fifth house, one of which is described as by the word Rajya, meaning authority to rule. And then the influence additionally of Mars or Rahu Ketu lends dictatorial tendencies, sometimes rashness, as he says, even tactlessness here. Often one of the karakas in this formation could be Mars itself. And again, he repeats that Jupiter joining this combination, not as the MK or the PK, makes it more idealistic. And he describes it as being almost like a repetition of the Parashari Raja Yoga of a combination of the fourth and the fifth lords, or any sort of Kendra and Trikona lords. I go on to say here, not quoting him, I go on to say here that he also goes, in his examples, seems to imply that that in this combination, the result can also be the tendency to, in your quest for positions and for for power among politicians, they do so with a real great determination and a persistence. He sort of referred to this as a doggedness, where you just, don't give up. You just pursue it. In his case studies, it also seems to imply that the influence of the GK can play the role of both Mars and Rahu Ketu axis in terms of these inclinations. And of course, in this article, I showed the way in which these combinations apply to the birth chart of Joe Biden, who's kind of seen at the moment, at least, the polls currently don't mean anything, but he's seen at the moment, at least, as being the front runner among Democratic candidates. And of course, Kamala Harris is as well. So what I thought we would do today, let me stop sharing screen here, is to look at some charts of some major politicians from history, even those that were dictators, which was a part of his research. But before I do that, is there any question about the combination we're talking about here? Again, it's the connection of the Gemini MK with the PK, either conjunct or through Rashi Drishti. Then what we're looking for is the additional influence on one of those or both of those of either Mars, or Mars being a part of that combination, or also the influence of the Rahu Ketu axis. Again, this can come by conjunction, or it can become by Rashi Drishti, and then also potentially the influence of the GK. Any questions about that before we move on? Okay, so I'm going to share screen now, and I'm going to be pulling up the chart. Please let me know. Not yet. Please let me know when you see the chart of Sir Winston Churchill.
Here it is, Mark.
You're seeing it?
Yes.
Okay. So you can see here that it was Virgo Lagna, right? Who's the Karakamsha Lagna here? Can someone calculate that for me? Or identify that for me?
Taurus.
Pisces.
So the Amakaraka is, it goes into Pisces in the Vamsha, so this becomes the Karakamsha Lagna, right? And what combination are we focused in on here? What do we see that's relevant to what we're talking about?
The MK and PK have a mutual aspect to each other in this chart. So, with MK getting the aspect of GK and PK getting the aspect of Rahu.
Okay, so Draven outlined this correctly. Everyone to focus in on the MK, which is Saturn. And the MK here is in a mutual Rashi Drishti, movable Rashi to fixed Rashi, with the PK Sun. And what do we note in particular about this PK Sun, this, in terms of it having a source of strength? Anyone see that?
Vargotama.
It is Vargotama.
It's Vargotama. And then joining this combination, I think significantly so, is Venus as the AK. And then what, of course, is Venus's source of strength here?
It is exalted in Navamsha.
It's exalted in D9. And so this obviously forms a very strong and dramatic Gemini Raja Yoga, falling in the third house from the birth Lagna, but also in the ninth house from Karakamsha Lagna Pisces. And then additionally, what we're seeing here is that the PK comes under the influence of Rahu Ketu axis, in this case Rahu. Rahu makes a Rashi Drishti aspect onto this PK Sun. And then Saturn as the MK gets the aspect of the GK Moon. So this combination that K.N. Rao was talking about most definitely applies in a very total degree to the chart of Winston Churchill. And, insofar as his persistence and his doggedness in pursuing his goals in general, but particularly his political goals, he once described himself as an obstinate pig. That was the word that he used, an obstinate pig. And if if you read biographies of Churchill and the people who were around him and people who knew his character well, this, persistence and doggedness in the pursuit, obstinacy, you might say, in the pursuit of his, or whatever it was, his position that he was trying to, you might say, carry, was rather extreme in his case. And of course, he wasn't a dictator. He did, of course, become prime minister, but operated very autocratically. He certainly sort of had those as autocratically as he could, which was pretty autocratically given the fact he was initially prime minister during the war years, where a strong leadership hand was very necessary and was I'd say welcomed in this case. Now, the period, he actually became prime minister twice. He was prime minister during World War II, roughly sort of 1939 through 44, 45, and then actually was voted out of office by the British public, but then actually became prime minister again. Now, this was from a Charadasha point of view, because we're focused on Jaimini here. I'm going to come up to, let me collapse this here. You see that starting at age 66 in 1940 through 1951, so an 11-year period, he was running his Cancer major period in Charadasha. How does such a period, and in what way would be predictable on Jaimini factors that such a period could make him prime minister of England?
The aspect of Putra Karaka and Atma Karaka on the Lagna.
So first of all, the best Jaimini Raja Yoga chart, both of which the planets having sources of strength, AK, PK, Venus-Sun combination. What Ekaterina Katya is seeing is that it aspects Cancer, but then where would it also aspect?
Isn't that Maharaja Yoga?
Who said this?
Georgie.
Very good, Georgie. So what he's referring to is that the Maharaj Yoga, as defined in Parashara Hora from the Jaimini point of view, happens when the AK and PK in strength are falling in the first or the fifth house from Karakamsha Lagna, which is not the case here. In Karakamsha Lagna, it also actually falls into the ninth. But what's going on is that when he runs his Cancer period, you might say it becomes a temporary Maharaj Yoga, because from Cancer, then this combination would appear in the fifth house from there. And so that was a very good recognition on your part, Georgie. But
also aspects the 10th.
Good. Besides aspecting Cancer itself, it also aspects onto the 10th house from there, that is from Cancer, which would be Aries, right? And this birth time, how precisely accurate it is, I don't know. I'm fairly certain that the Rashi is correct. Whether it's going to give correct D10 Lagna is...
Mark, the fact that it also aspects the 7th, which is Pradapapti, a house of Pradapapti, would that be relevant?
You mean the 7th from Cancer?
Yes, Mark. The same combination aspecting the 10th and the 7th.
Well, what's relevant here is that, it's not just the AK-PK combination, but it's the AK-PK-MK combination. And the way in which, it also fulfills these other requirements of getting the additional influence of the RKA and or Mars. It's not Mars in this case, but it's the GK. And, he kind of embodied the determination of the British public in the face of the initial losses to the Nazis. And the folks were getting background noise. This means someone has not muted their mic. So I would have people be very aware of that. I think Patricia Rosas, you need to mute your mic. But just
Okay.
you please do so, Patricia. Thank you. He kind of represented this, with his famous speeches. I can't quote him, but the fact that they would just, resist to the nth degree, the Nazis' attempt to, invade their country and to, beat them militarily, sort of represented that. So this was happening in his Cancer major period, and he was prime minister twice during that. Now, in his in Nishotri Dasha, this was happening in his Jupiter Mahadasha. And in what way would you see this predictable, both from the Parashi point of view, both based on the birth chart and then also based on his D10?
Jupiter is in a good house and forming Gaja Keshari and plus Shubha Sankhya Yoga in D10.
Very good, Katya. But let's start with the birth chart first, and then we'll go to D10. Why? How is this indicated here also in the Rashi? What's going on here?
Jupiter is in a Raja Yoga with Mercury.
Okay, so first of all, you see that there is a Raja Yoga being formed involving Jupiter as an angle lord, ruling 4th and 7th, in which case the idea of Padaprapti, position giver, as the 7th lord. Why Padaprapti? Why is the 7th house a position giver? Because it's the 10th from the 10th. And its combination with Mercury, who serves as both an angle lord and trine lord. Of course, they form an angle trine Raja Yoga combination. And always with qualifying yogas, you've heard from me very often that you have to see strength of planets. What do you notice about the strength of your Jupiter, just based on its in the birth chart? What do you see about it that would give it a good source of strength?
It's for Gautama and D10.
That would give it strength in D10, but how about just in general here?
Oh, okay, well.
It's Vargotama. It's Vargotama.
It's Vargotama in your Vamsha. Actually, in this position, Jupiter is going to fall into Libra in many of the divisional charts, meaning it's going to be Vargotama in so many of those.
That's what I was trying to say, that it's for Gautama.
Good win. Yes, no, you're correct. You're correct. And, it reminds me of Bill Clinton's Jupiter for Virgo Lagna, and where he became president, you'll see that his Jupiter is also at the very, very early degrees of Libra, making it Vargotama in so many of the divisional charts. So it was clearly just a case of, not just a case, but it was a case of Raja Yoga. And then now come to what we heard Katya say with regards to D10, in which it becomes very, very obvious. Some of you may have heard me remark that in the divisional charts, Gajikesari Yoga, or even Kesari Yoga, is something to pay attention to. I found it to be very reliable in giving their results, particularly if the planets involved, in this case Jupiter, holds a good promise in the birth chart as well, which of course it does. And it's in the birth chart, say in D10, it forms a very good Gajikesari Yoga. Why would I say this? Why would I say that it's especially good Gajikesari Yoga?
Because Moon is the Lagna Lord of D10, that's why.
Moon is the Lagna Lord involved in this. Of course, Jupiter is Vargotama, as Wendy said, with regards to this chart, but then there's one additional reason.
The aspect of benefic, Venus.
Right, so for the Gajikesari Yoga to give its best results, Jupiter must have the additional influence of a natural benefic. Here it's both in the sign of Venus, a natural benefic, but then also aspected by another benefic. I'm sorry, aspecting back onto, it's sign lord is what I'm trying to say, aspects back onto it as well. So this combination of Raja Yoga in the birth chart and then Gajikesari Yoga in the D10 is the clear indication of why the Jupiter major period raised him up so high. I think he became prime minister actually just shortly after moving into this period. Of course, the height of the war years, where the war years were won, and his leadership was, credited in a major way. And it's what made him, famous and why he got a knighthood. Jupiter, Mercury was a period and sub-period related to that. And then back when, when he was voted out of office, he came back into office, I believe. I'd have to check the time to be sure, but I believe it was Jupiter Moon. Going back to the Gemini system, we saw that it was the Cancer major period. You've not heard me comment that much on the application of Charadasha to D10, but of course, it should be applied in D10, in which case, what strikes you about Cancer? What strikes you about Cancer in D10 as far as the major period where he became prime minister?
Which is Lagna.
Sorry?
Which is Lagna.
It's the Lagna. That's one thing, right?
Saturn, the MK aspects it.
Saturn, the MK aspects it. Yes, that's true. One thing, it puts benefics in angles, folks, along with a strong Mars. Obviously, there's some Jaimini Sutra that talks about how, if there's this mostly benefics and angles, then and it's connected with the Lagna Lord, then a person becomes a king. But see also the strength of the fourth house from there with that Moon-Jupiter combination. So, it lends an additional picture to what we see as why the Cancer major period could have made him prime minister. But this, when the chart of Winston Churchill and what is known about his character, as it were, his tendencies, as it were, are a perfect illustration of this combination that Winston Churchill, or that K.N. Rao was highlighting about the PK-MK combination with those additional influences. So, so far as what we've discussed here, are there any comments or questions before we move on? Okay.
Mark,
Yes.
does the fourth house in the Dashamsha show the seat of power as well, like you were talking about?
Yes. Or from Dasha Lagna, all right? Look at the fourth house from, using Jupiter, the major period lord, from there. I mean, you'd see this in the birth chart, but you then, of course, also, well, we'll look at it in the birth chart, for example. Use Dasha Lagna. Use Jupiter as a Lagna. What do you see? If you use Jupiter's place in Libra as a Lagna, what happens?
The fourth lord in the fourth.
Sign.
Saturn becomes the Yogacaraka planet, giving Sasha Yoga as the fourth lord in the fourth house, right?
Mm.
And then apply Dasha Lagna in D10, and then what happens? Fourth lord Saturn from there, also now Yogacaraka planet, is not in the fourth house, but it's strongly placed in its own sign in the fifth house, and the fourth house from there has the exalted Mars. So, does this answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Any other thoughts before we move on then? Okay. So I need to change logins here, change databases. Just give me a moment. And now we're going to look at the chart of the German dictator, Adolf Hitler, one of the most notorious people in history as far as a dictator, and what resulted as a result of his leading Germany. So again, relative to our discussion, what do you make note of here? Someone needs
Trikarka and Putsukarka are together.
good Katya, but then what then additionally is going on?
Huketu, the influence of Rahu Ketu.
So you've got the MK PK combination, and I want to get up B9 here before we look at B10. Hold on. And they're under influence of the Rahu Ketu axis, right? And so you see the exact combination that K and Rahu was talking about here. But now, just from a going back to a Parashari point of view, Hitler came to power. Here, let me get this dasha correctly here. Hitler came to power in the 1930s in his Rahu major period. And it gives us some very interesting lessons with regards to how Rahu and Ketu can, and particularly Rahu, can bring a person to very high status to power in this case because he was a politician. How does Rahu do this? How would you see it as being predictable?
Rahu would give the result of Mercury, and Mercury is in a Raja Yoga because it's the 9th lord in the 7th.
Well, before Rahu gives the results of Mercury, which of course it does, and what you're saying is correct, what would we make note of whose results it also?
So Rahu is in the nakshatra of Jupiter.
Well, even before that, when
It's aspected by Moon and Jupiter.
Right, Rahu, the first thing we look for with the nodes, folks, is if they're conjunct any planets or aspected by any planets. And we think of them as an axis, right? So Rahu Ketu is being strongly influenced here by the Moon-Jupiter combination, right? Which is not Gajikesari Yoga because Jupiter is not in an angle from the birth lagna, but is a strong Kesari Yoga. Is the moon at least half bright here? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yeah, yes. And Jupiter, of course, is strong in its own sign. And what kind of combination is this? Combination of which house lords from the birth lagna?
3, 6, and 10.
3, 6, and 10. Now think about that. First of all, 10th lord, obviously, has to do with one's status. And it was in the Rahu period giving the results partially of this Kesari Yoga that he came to power. But then which house rules warfare and aggressiveness?
6th house.
6th house. Now, if anyone knows about, Hitler's rise, and one of the things that enabled him to have his rise, and one of the things the Nazis parties were noted for in terms of whipping up, support for their causes, what strikes you about its placement here in the 3rd house?
It's about courage and.
Well, it's about, it's the house of courage, right? But, one of the things that was noted for in these rise to power is these huge theatrical spectacle rallies that would take place, that were like theater on a very mass scale, in which case he would engage in this fiery oratory like an actor. In fact, he would practice in front of a mirror his various gestures, like an actor might rehearse for a role. And it was these big extravaganzas that really sort of began to, create the Nazi movement, you might say, and to attract followers.
That's the third house, dramatics.
That's it. You know, it was this third house of the theater, of the performing arts. And this was like this huge, you know, performance designed to have, you know, a particular sort of effect on those people participating and those people viewing it, which it very much did. So Rahu gives this effect just by being connected to the Rahu Ketu axis. But now, you know, of course, another way we interpret the node is to see the Lord of the sign that it's in, which is Mercury. And then we're back to Draven's comments. We have, you know, this powerful combination of planets in the seventh house, the position giver, again, Padaprapti, forming multiple Raja Yogas, right? So part of that is the first Lord in the seventh, that gives Raja Yoga by placement alone, but its conjunction with the seventh Lord Mars gives Raja Yoga by conjunction. And then add to that the ninth Lord Mercury, which is then, you know, you've got multiple angle trine combinations, all with an exalted sun, who here is the 11th Lord, right? And so, you know, one can see that this kind of result. Now, someone mentioned that Rahu is also in Jupiter's nakshatra. So it just reiterates the way in which Rahu is giving results of what? Giving results of this Kesari Yoga and giving results of the powerful angle trine combinations, all forming in the seventh house, getting the additional aspect of Jupiter. And I think he first became Chancellor of Germany, if I'm not mistaken. Well, it would have been either Rahu Saturn or Rahu Mercury. I'd have to check for sure. How might, you know, what would you note about, you know, Rahu Saturn as far as a period? I think it was in that period that he became, you know, Chancellor of Germany, and then later on he became, you know, complete dictator of Germany. This would have been, I believe, in, you know, Rahu Mercury. And all his initial successes in his war of aggression happened that. What would you make note of with regards to, you know, Rahu Saturn?
Saturn is in the nakshatra of Mercury, so it could give the results of.
Well, hold on, you know, it is, but the more obvious thing in terms of Saturn.
Saturn is the Yoga Karaka planet in the 10th house.
In the 10th house, right? That alone. Now, you know, of
Can
course.
you repeat that? Can you repeat that, please? I didn't hear that.
Yeah. So there's this principle in the Laghu Parashari that when a planet shows the ability to give the fruit of Raja Yoga, the question becomes, in what sub-periods would it do that? And one of the answers is in the sub-periods of planets that aren't connected, but who also give that same effect, that is the effect of Raja Yoga. And so what Draven was highlighting is that for Libra Lagna, Saturn is the Yoga Karaka planet. It's the fourth and the fifth Lord and the 10th. So Rahu gives Raja Yoga in the ways in which we talked about it. But then also Saturn as a sub-period Lord because it is the Raja Yoga Karaka. Is it clear?
Yeah, I just didn't hear everything you said, but thank you. I got it.
Sure. And of course, you know, what source of strength does Saturn have here that's apparent?
It's in an exchange with Mars. I'm sorry, it's not in an exchange in Mars. It's got a mutual aspect. I'm sorry, that's not a strength.
A source of strength that aspects onto all those planets in the seventh house, which explains some things. But
so in Navamsha.
Yeah, in Navamsha, Kumar is seeing that, you know, Saturn is in its own sign. Now, if we see D10, what do we notice about Rahu Saturn?
It's 110.
First of all, Rahu is in Saturn's sign, so there's a sambandha between them, right? And then Saturn is in its exaltation sign.
Mm-hmm.
And then Saturn is falling 10th from Rahu. This is a principle some of you have learned from me if you took my webinar or read my book, Secrets of the Dashamsha. So you see the significance of the Rahu Saturn period here. Now, in Charadasha, it was, wouldn't you know it, the Aries major period, which, if anyone knowing the Jaimini system, would easily see the significance of this. One of the most significant Jaimini Raja yogas is a combination of the AK and AMK, which is what we see here on the seventh house, again, of the position giver. With Saturn, with Mars very strong. Mars is strong in two ways. I'm not showing Navamsha here, but Mars is, I believe, if memory serves, in its own sign in the birth, obviously in the birth chart, but also in Navamsha. But then, why is he, going to war here? Why is he being so? Why is he being aggressively pursuing wars of aggression and of conquest? What would be the factor that would?
The planetary war in the seventh house.
Well, there's a planetary war in the seventh house, and it certainly has its significance. But that's not why I would say that he's being warlike during this time. I mean, it's active. Obviously has a Roshaka yoga, but that's from the Parashari point of view. What from the Jaimini point of view would indicate his tendencies this way during this period? Who is the Jaimini Karaka that's like unto the sixth lord?
GK.
It's the influence of a very powerful GK here. Right. And this is a 12-year period, but of course, he moves out of this period in 1941, in which case all these planets, including AMK, now go to the 12th. So it shows, his downfall, thank God, during that time as well. But now, what is the Karkamsha Lagna here? AK is at 24, 23 of Aries here. So where does it fall in Navamsha?
Scorpio.
Scorpio. And Scorpio becomes the Karakamsha Lagna. What house does Aries become from there?
Sixth.
Sixth house. You see, so when he runs this Aries period, he's basically throwing all of Europe and a good portion of the world into a world war. What is the you want to see if combinations repeat from the Charadasha point of view, if the Jaimini Raja Yoga's combinations repeat in the birth chart. And so what would we notice here about his AKAM combination?
It is aspecting Karakamsha.
It's aspecting, well, we'd want to see that it repeats in Navamsha, in which case it would be in the Lagna, right? And that is the Karakamsha Lagna also. See the 10th house from there, right? See the 10th house from there. So this was his karma. Sad for the world, but that's what happened. Coming back though to the just a moment. Coming back then to this MK PK combination under the influence of the Rahu Ketu axis, giving him strong dictatorial tendencies, which of course he had to an extreme degree. Go ahead.
Yeah, and so when you mentioned why was he so aggressive and basically going to war, there should be this yoga called Parijata Yoga. And one of the indications of the Parijata Yoga is fond of war, right?
Yes.
And he has it formed by Mars itself.
Well, why don't you define for the group, because not everyone is familiar with that yoga, why don't you define for that group that yoga?
Yeah, it is when you have the dispositor of the Lagna word, either essentially strong in angle or trine, and its dispositor, and then its dispositor in Navamsha, it's again either in angle or trine being strong, then you have Parijata Yoga. And you have, is basically, you see the dispositor of Venus, which is the Lagna Lord, is Mars in its Muotrikona sign in an angle in the main chart. And then you see the dispositor of Mars in Navamsha, it's Mars again, which is, as I said, it's an angle strong in the main chart, and that's what you get Parijata Yoga.
This is excellent recognition on your part, Georgie. I congratulate you. It's exactly so. It's exactly so. Thank you for that contribution. Excellent. So any other, well now, you know, Hitler, as everyone probably knows, to avoid capture by the Allies when Berlin was being overtaken, he chose to commit suicide, but married his longtime mistress just prior to that. And this happened in the major period of Rahu and the sub-period of Venus. So you see how a period gets a person married, and then just subsequent to that, they engage in a double suicide, ending their life. How does Rahu Venus clearly indicated, which by the way, a very famous prediction by the famous Indian Jyotishi, Dr. Raman, he predicted the demise and timed the demise of Adolf Hitler. And it's one of his many great predictions that then earned him the reputation that he obtained. How does Rahu Venus show his death here?
Venus is in seventh and Maraka, along with the Mars, which is the second and seventh lord.
So we start with Rahu, who, as we saw, gives the results of Mercury, who's in the seventh Maraka house, and then come to the sub-period of Venus, which is the Lagna Lord in this Maraka seventh house, and both of these are conjunct the most primary markers, or one of the most primary markers, which would be Mars as the seventh Lord. So, but then, of course, most of you, if you've read my articles or read books of mine, you know that Venus Rahu and Rahu Venus is a notorious period and sub-period for bringing strong relationship karma, and oftentimes periods when people marry. Just before this, I conducted a webinar for a course that I'm teaching, and we were talking about specifically the predicting marriage, where I highlighted these kind of periods and sub-period that can give that. But it's a rather sort of strange karma, you might say, or paradoxical karma, that you would then marry and then kill yourself. Okay, any other questions and thoughts about this chart before we move on?
Mark, the Rahu Venus in a 6-8 combination in the Navamsh, would that also play a role? Because Mars is also closely related to this.
Say this again.
Rahu and Venus, I think they are in a 6-8 kind of a relationship with Mars owning both the houses.
Well, you know, one thing it helps, it shows also the additional timing of the marriage, because, you know, Rahu gives the results of Mars, it's in the Lagna, and Venus is the seventh lord of the Navamsha. So, you know, the timing of marriage is pretty clearly reflected both in the birth chart and the Navamsha. Now, the fact that the marriage actually ended shortly thereafter, you know, as a result of this double suicide, you know, you're talking about the 6-8 relationship there, with both the sub-period lords, or Venus is a sub-period lord falling 8th from Rahu. This is what you're referring to?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And one thing I should additionally mention, we talked about, you know, Rahu giving the results of Mercury, which is the, you know, major period that he came to power. See, of course, also the chart from Chandra Lagna, where now Rahu is in the seventh house of the position giver, again given results of Mercury, and look at that combination in the fifth house from there, indicating Raja, or the authority to rule. It's pretty dramatic. It was his karma to come to power in this way, unfortunately for the world. Okay, anything else before we go on? Have to change databases again. Bear with me. We're now going to be looking at the chart of the Italian dictator during World War II and prior to that, started in the 20s, I believe, Benito Mussolini, who had the misfortune of aligning himself with Hitler. It was part of what's called the Axis that lost the war. And Italy suffered greatly, as did all the countries of Europe, of course. And he was eventually hanged by his people. Came to a very bad end. But what do we see here? Again, relevant to our discussion.
The PK and the MK conjunct in the 8th with Mars.
Does everyone see it? We see Saturn here, who's actually the Yogacaraka planet of this. Well, I'm not mixed. I don't want to mix systems. From a Gemini point of view, it's the PK, and it's conjunct an exalted moon, who is the MK, and together they are with Mars. Do they receive any additional influences that are relevant here? Hmm?
Rahu and the GK Sun.
Yes, Rahu aspects onto this combination. And of course, the Sun has the GK. So in the case of both Hitler, who was very much a dictator, he was had absolute power in Germany at one point, and now also Benito Mussolini, who also was a absolute dictator, had absolute power over the government of Italy during his regime. You see this sort of combination, you might say, in the extreme. And in both cases, in Hitler's case, there's not the influence of Jupiter as a planet that's not a part of the combination. In Hitler, his Jupiter was either the MK, I forget which, or the PK. But as Ken Rao said, in order to give the idealism and to tone down the dictatorial and aggressive tendencies, Jupiter shouldn't be a part of the forming it, but should be influencing it in some way. And of course, that's not the case here. It does have the influence of the natural benefic Mercury, who's not much of a natural benefic here, since it's not with other benefics and it's with a mild malefic. So this is, again, the combination, you might say, in spades that produces what King and Rao observed as being very dictatorial tendencies once they gain power, once they become a ruler. And it usually starts out that they're an elected official, as in the case of Hitler, but then dissolve that and dissolve any sort of participatory government and become dictators, usually with the backing of the military. That's the typical pattern. So Benito Mussolini, from a Parashari point of view, first came to power in the early 1920s, and it would have been in his major period of Jupiter and the sub-period of Venus. Major period of Jupiter, sub-period of Venus.
Yeah,
what strikes
that would be Maharaj Yoga again, because it would be the Karakamsh Lagna. Gemini, it's the first house.
Hold on, we're doing Parashari first, Raven. We're doing Parashari first. Okay, so we'll come to the Gemini, but please, we're going to look at this from the standpoint of Parashari first. Well, what kind of result does Venus as a sub-period lord give here?
Raja Yoga, because it's the first lord in the 9th.
It's the first lord in the 9th, right? Jupiter actually has a major period, obviously, is lord of 3 and 6. It's not an angle or a trine lord. I don't know, I can't vouch necessarily for the accuracy of the D10 Lagna. Again, I think this is, I'm certain the birth chart is correct, but I'm not sure the degree of the Lagna can actually be relied upon. But, go looking at it now from the from the Jaimini point of view. It happened in the major period of Pisces. Major period of Pisces. What would strike you about that?
The 10th from there would get the aspect of the AKMK Raja Yoga.
So obviously the real powerful Raja Yoga in his chart, just as in the chart of Hitler, was this combination of Venus as the AK and Jupiter as the AMK. Any source of strength here for either of these planets that you notice?
Venus is Vargotama.
Venus is Vargotama. Let me get D9 back up here. Venus is Vargotama. Jupiter doesn't really have any real significant source of strength here. But earlier, I believe you mentioned, Draven, that Pisces becomes the Karkamsha. Oh, no, I'm sorry. What becomes the Karkamsha Lagna? Karkamsha Lagna becomes Gemini, right?
Gemini. I'm sorry. I thought it was AKPK. It's not AKPK, so it's not a Maharaj Yoga. It's
so. But what I want people to see is that the Karkamsha Lagna becomes Gemini, and when he runs Pisces, this becomes the fourth house from there. We're having these two benefics forming this major Raja Yoga, but then they're going to aspect all the angles from there, including the 10th house, right? Including the 10th house. Now his fall from power, and he ended up being executed by his own people. He was hanged. Happened in the Saturn major period, and I believe it was Saturn Rahu. What strikes you about that? What strikes you about Saturn Rahu? Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, Saturn here goes to the 8th with the 10th Lord with the additional influence of a malefic, right? And see the 6-8 positional relationship between these two. If D10 Lagna is correct, see their situation and condition there too. Rahu is in Saturn's sign, one in the 12th and one in the 8th. Can't know if I can rely on D10 though, but if it is correct, then that's straight. But you can see it in just in the Rashi as well. Questions or comments in regards to what we've seen here before we move on? Okay, so now I'm pulling up the chart of someone who was Prime Minister of Pakistan. This gentleman here, whose name, except for the last two names, Ali Bhutto, I don't know if I can pronounce that first name. And I don't know a lot about this individual other than the fact that he, for a 4-year period from starting in August of 1973 to July of 1977, he was the Prime Minister of Pakistan. Came to a very bad end also. He was arrested and tried for, I don't know if they were, politically trumped up crimes or whatever, but he ended up actually being executed as well. He ended up actually being hanged. Another dictator that came to a very bad end, or a dictatorial type person that came to a bad end. What's the relevant combination that we see here again? Hmm? Anyone? Hello?
Yeah.
The MKPK combination.
And what's the difference, Kumar, between him and what we're seeing? We have to mute the mic, I think, because we've got background noise.
Yeah. So, there is no influence of Mars or the Rahu Ketu.
And who is there the influence of?
Here under the influence of the DK.
Well, strong Jupiter.
Right.
So there's no influence of Mars. There's no influence of the Rahu Ketu axis. There's no influence of the GK. There's only the influence of Jupiter as a strong natural benefic. Of course, you know, the Mercury as the PK and Jupiter as the DK do form a Gemini Raja Yoga. But, you know, you also see that these planets are in Jupiter's sign, aspected by this Jupiter. And remember what K and Rao's observations was about this. Now, they can be someone who, you know, aggressively and persistently pursues their political goals, but that they'll do so based on a certain idealism. Right? And again, if you go on Wikipedia and you read about, you know, this man and his political career and what he stood for and what he tried to accomplish, versus just the raw power of grab and aggression that we saw in the case of, you know, Hitler and Benito Mussolini, you'll see the difference here about this man. And he unfortunately did come to a bad end. He was, as I've said, executed. Whether, you know, it was a politically motivated thing, which I get the impression that maybe it was. This would have happened in 1979, April, which looks like it would have been Saturn-Mars. So what strikes you about that? Saturn-Mars.
It's a sixth house, eighth house combining together in the sixth house.
Right. We have the combination here of the sixth lord and with Saturn, the eighth lord, under the influence of the Rahu Ketu axes. And, you know, I'd have to look up the exact degrees, but there are certain drekanas in Scorpio, and I forget which one it is, but it's referred to as Pasha drekana. Pasha means noose, like a hangman's noose. And, you know, I'd have to see which drekana it is and whether these planets, either Saturn or Mars, which is are in the third drekana, whether it's that third drekana that's referred to as a Pasha drekana or the noose drekana. This is given in the Sanskrit classic Paladipika. But you know, if you look at the chart of the Iranian dictator, who am I thinking of here? Somebody help me out. Who am I thinking about? The Iranian dictator that was also hanged. Nobody can help me out here. Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein. You will find this situation that same thing happened to him. He was hanged, and I believe it was in planets in Scorpio, falling in the Pasha drekana. Of course, having planets there doesn't mean you're going to get hanged, right? It's the whole concept. It's the whole context of the chart that has to be seen before arriving about any conclusion, especially one like that. Now, from the I mentioned his rise to power. He first became prime minister in August of 73. So you see that this would have happened, interestingly enough, in his Scorpio major period. But now, you know, what do you see with regards to that could suggest something like this?
Is this a Viparita Raja Yoga classic?
What we're doing, Gemini, Scorpio.
Well, all the malefics are surrounding.
All the malefics are surrounding, but, you know, what is predictable that you could potentially, you know, rise to power and be in a high position during this time.
You have the Atmakaraka moon aspecting the AMK.
No, we're doing Gemini, folks, in which case we're only considering Rashi Drishti, not what you have to see, folks.
There's a AMK and the fifth lord, Venus.
It contains the AMK, folks. That's the key thing. And then what Draven is seeing is that it forms a Gemini Raja Yoga with Venus, who is the fifth lord. When we're calculating Gemini Raja Yogas, that we also use the fifth lord. So this combination of the AMK and strong in its own sign with the fifth lord Venus. And then Karakamsha Lagna is what here? Who's the Karakamsha Lagna?
It's the Aries.
Virgo.
It's, let me pull up Navamsha here. You have to see the 8K moon, its degrees, and calculate from there. So it would be moon here. With this combination falling, influencing the 5th house from there. Right? Now, if he came to power as prime minister in August of 1973, it looks as if the sub-period would have been Aries. From where, see how many planets aspect onto the, well, first of all, this AMK, this combination of Scorpio aspects on Aries, but it's going to aspect on also the 10th house from there, which gets the influence of additional grahas as well. His demise, well, we already looked at that, okay. So this again is this combination that Kay and I talked about, this PK-MK combination, but with a very different twist here. It doesn't have the influence of Mars or the Rahu Ketu axis in the GK. It has the influence of the strong Jupiter, showing the idealism. So I'd like to show you one more chart this way. It's of another Pakistani prime minister. This man here, who, first he comes from a military background. He's a 4-star general in the Pakistan military, and was the head of their military at one point, and then later seized power in a bloodless coup, as I understand it. Again, I don't have a lot of background here. Again, what do you see in terms of relevant combination? So we see Saturn as the MK is in a mutual Rashi Drishti with a strong moon in its own sign as the PK. And this combination is joined by the Sun as the AMK. And he first came to power as prime minister in June of 2001. So let me get that period up here. You can see it was Makar, it was Capricorn. And based on what you've learned from me about timing periods when a person can really have a very high professional rise, what strikes you about the major period of Capricorn? Giving this. No one
You
sees
have
it?
this, the 10th house from Capricorn gets the aspect of the MK and the AMK PK.
Well, the 10th house has the aspect of Saturn as the MK, and then the planets in Leo, which would be DK and GK and Rahu.
Sure.
What I'm seeing here, Kumar, is the way in which the AMK goes to the 7th.
7th. Oh.
Always remember this idea. AMK in the 7th house again, being a position giver, pada property, 10th from the 10th. You'll find that this can time a period of rise for an individual. In this case, it's not just the AMK, but it's AMK with the PK involved in this, MK, PK, AMK combination. It's falling 7th there. If it was June 2001, it looks like it would have been the sub-period of Aries, where this combination would fall in the 4th from there, right? On the 4th from there. From a Parashari point of view, if it happened in starting in 2001, oops, we can do that. It would have happened in his moon Mahadasha. What happened in his moon Mahadasha? And again, in what way would that be predictable that a person would have a significant rise in life during this person's moon Mahadasha?
It forms the best Raja Yoga for this particular Rashi with the Sun, 9-10.
So the combination of the 9th Lord Moon with the 10th Lord Sun is the best Parashari angle trine combination for Scorpio. It's a better one if the moon is bright, or the moon is dark, but still it forms a very potent combination. In this case, falling in the good 9th house. And some of you have studied the Lagu Parashari with me, and certain angle trine combinations that are particularly highlighted there are combinations of 9 and 10, particularly when they fall in either the 9th house or the 10th house. Here they're falling in the 9th house. And then also, what do you see on the screen here that would indicate rise in the moon major period?
Moon is in the Wagner of the D10 chart.
Moon is in the Lagna. Now it looks as if the sub-period was Venus, and presents an interesting picture here. It's in its exaltation sign in the 8th. If this, Lagna is correct. By the way, the moon not just being in Lagna, but also getting the aspect of a strong Jupiter there. So a combination of activating a major Raja Yoga, 9-10 in the 9th, in the birth chart and falling in Lagna there very clearly indicates a period of dramatic rise for him, which is what happened.
Mark, can I ask a question?
Always.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure I heard you right. Did you say it's better when the planets fall in the 10th house from the 9th versus the 10th to the 9th?
No, I didn't say it was better. I was saying that either one of those is highlighted as being a really, really significant Raja Yoga.
Okay, I just thought I heard you say one or the other, but I know they're both good. Okay, thank you.
Yep, it's 9-10 either in 9 or 10.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you.
Mark, actually what you said then was that if moon was on the opposite side of the sun, it would have been a better combination.
Well, yes. When the moon is very full, that is when it's across from the sun, then, it's better simply because the moon is much more benefic and powerful in that way. Now, what creates the moon's power here, of course, is the fact that it's in its own sign. So this is a very powerful, make no mistake, 9-10 combination. Some of you were participating in a webinar I was giving yesterday morning. Many of you weren't, so let me pull up the chart here of a U.S. politician very much in the news, not a presidential candidate, but a woman who was a person from she's a minority female who became the youngest woman to ever be elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. This happened just in the midterm elections at the end of 2017. She was sworn into office in the beginning of 2018. She's very much in the news these days, some in a controversial sort of way, but very high profile and commanding a lot of attention, even for someone who's just, very inexperienced and just started her political career. But you can see why, based on her birth chart and periods that she's currently running. Now, you see that this is also Scorpio Lagna, and you will see there's also there's a connection between the 9th Lord Moon and the 10th Lord Sun. They're not in 9 or they're not in 10. They fall along the 5-11 axis, but in this case, the Moon is coming to complete fullness. And of course, there's more to it than that. There is the 9-10, there's the 1-10 combination. Mars here is the 1st Lord, Sun here is the 10th Lord. This is another combination that's highlighted in the Lagu Parashari, particularly if it fell in the 1st house or the 10th house. Here it's not doing that, but it's a combination. And then, of course, Mars as the 1st Lord in a mutual glance with the 9th Lord Moon is a 1-9 combination. So there's 9-10, 1-10, and 9-10, all falling here along the 5-11 axis. Mercury as an exalted 11th Lord joins the party. She's particularly known for her effective use of social media, which of course is ruled by the 11th house, for getting out her message, for her campaign, and also, again, just sort of communicating with her constituency and with the world in general. She's particularly known for her effective use of this. Now, when did this all happen for her? Happened in the K2 major period, which of course because really the only graha it doesn't get the aspect or isn't conjunct any other graha. It's giving the results almost exclusively of the sun, which of course is then activating this these powerful Raja Yogas. And it was exactly in K2 Sun that she won office. It was in K2 Moon that she was sworn in and became a congresswoman. And now, of course, it's K2 Mars when she's getting all this media attention and is quite well known at the moment. Now, if you look at D10, you see other reasons why K2 can bring this result. It's falling by Gautama in an angle. It's, with the natural benefic Mercury here. The moon, K2 moon is when she actually obtained the office, which is very clearly indicated here, additionally in D10, which, is good support for the accuracy of this D10. This birth time does come from a written record, which doesn't ensure an accurate D10, but given the timing of things here, this really sort of confirms that this is indeed the D10 Lagna. So that is our discussion for today. Actually, let me just pull her chart up one more time. I don't know that I've ever checked to see if she has. So look here, folks. The MK is, of course, Saturn, and it's not connected to the PK in this case. So the combination does not apply to her chart. Okay. All right. So hold on. Stop sharing screen here. So that is what I wanted to talk about today. If other charts of Democratic hopefuls that seem like they might have a chance to win the nomination appear, then of course I'll be writing about those, as I will be writing about the election in general as it's coming up. But before we conclude today, is there any thoughts, questions, comments you want to make relative to what we've discussed here? Obviously, if you didn't know Gemini, you were kind of lost here. Hopefully, I've explained it well enough that you've been able to follow.
Mark, I just can't recall from your article if you mentioned if Trump had the MKPK with Mars or the Rahu K2 axis.
He doesn't. He gets his autocratic and dictatorial tendencies in other ways. Obviously, this is not the only combination that can incline that way. But, I believe I did check, and I don't think he does have that.
Mark, it's
Yes.
George here.
Yes.
On social media that you just mentioned in regards to the chart of Alexandra, what about having Rahu in the third as another indication of social media?
It could be. It's a sort of a 311 kind of thing, right? You would have seen that Saturn, her third lord, aspects onto the 11th house and those planets in it. Yeah, bringing involve the third lord. Obviously, one's social network is, in all of one's, quote, contacts this way, is 11th house indication, right? Yeah. So this would be my response to that.
Okay.
What else? Anything? Okay, so I really appreciate everyone's good participation in this webinar. We will, of course, be meeting again at the end of August after I've produced another article. A little probably more substantial this time. I was very short of time in this current period because I've got 2 courses going and some other things going on in my life. So this was a shorter article and maybe not as much meat as they typically have, but that won't be true of the next article. So we'll end as we normally do with our Sanskrit prayer. Om Masato Ma Sadgamaya, Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya, Mrityor Ma Amritam Gamaya, Sarvesham Swasti Bhavatu, Sarvesham Shanti Bhavatu, Sarvesham Purnam Bhavatu, Sarvesham Mangalam Bhavatu, Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu, Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Until we meet again, folks, everyone, take care. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Namaste.